Dr. Kyung-ho Kim pushed his glasses up his nose and stared at the papers covering his desk. Coffee stains marked the edges of handwritten notes. Books lay open everywhere, their pages yellow with age. His small office at Seoul National University looked like a storm had blown through it, but Kyung-ho knew where everything was. He picked up his pen and wrote another line. The words came slowly now. Each sentence had to be perfect. This book would change everything, or it would destroy him, maybe both. Outside his window, Seoul buzzed with normal life. People walked to work, cars moved through streets. Children played in parks. They had no idea that their world was about to shake. The galactic dominion ruled over Earth with gentle but firm control. Humans were allowed to live their lives, as long as they stayed quiet and did what they were told. Kyung-ho had spent 20 years studying the Dominion. He learned their languages. He read their laws. He watched how they treated different species. What he found made his stomach turn. The Vorthok ruled everything. They were tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and cold black eyes. They believed they were better than everyone else. Not just a little better, but much better. So much better that other species were like animals to them. Smart animals, but still animals. Below the Vorthok were the Zelthorn. They had blue skin and could live for hundreds of years. The Dominion used them as administrators and managers. They got better food and housing than most, but they still had to obey the Vorthok without question. Then came species like the Dothrok. Short, strong beings with thick skin. They worked in factories and mines. They built the ships that carried Dominion armies across the stars. They lived in crowded dormitories and ate simple food. At the bottom were humans and a few other species. They were allowed to exist because they were useful. Humans were good at solving problems and making things work better. But they had no power, no voice in how they were governed. They were pets at best. This was the natural order according to Dominion teaching. Each species had its place. Some were born to rule. Others were born to serve. Fighting this order was like fighting gravity. Impossible and stupid, Kyung-ho disagreed. His book, The Universal Rights of Thinking Beings, said something dangerous. It said that any creature that could think, feel, and choose was equal in worth. A human was worth as much as a Vorthok. A Dothrak had the same right to freedom as a Zelthorn. Intelligence created dignity, not species or birth. The idea seemed simple, too simple, but it was like a bomb waiting to explode. Kyung-ho had been careful. He wrote in academic language that most people would find boring. He hid his most radical ideas in footnotes and appendices. But anyone who read the whole book would understand its real message. The Dominion was built on a lie. A knock came at his door. Kyung-ho quickly covered his papers with other documents. "Come in," he said. His research assistant, Hae-jin Lee, entered with a stack of books. She was 25 years old and brilliant. More importantly, she understood what Kyung-ho was really doing. "Professor, I brought the materials you requested," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were worried. "Thank you, Hae-jin. Please, sit down." She sat in the old chair across from his desk. "Have you heard about the new regulations?" Kyung-ho felt his heart sink. What regulations? All academic publications must now be reviewed by Dominion Cultural Affairs before release. They say it's to prevent misunderstandings between species. They both knew what it really meant. The Dominion was watching human scholarship more closely. Someone had made them nervous. "When does this start?" Kyung-ho asked. "Next month?" Kyung-ho looked at his manuscript. 300 pages of careful argument. 2 decades of research. If he submitted it for review, it would never see daylight. The censors would burn it and probably arrest him. Professor Hae-jin said quietly, "Maybe it's time." "Time for what?" "To finish the book. To get it out there before they can stop us." Kyung-ho studied her face. She was young, with her whole life ahead of her. Getting involved in this could destroy her future. The Dominion did not forgive those who spread dangerous ideas. "This isn't your fight, Hae-jin." "Yes, it is," she said firmly. "I've read every chapter you've written. I've helped with the research. I know what you're saying is true. Can't let them bury it. If they catch us, then we'll have proved your point about how tyranny really works. Kyung-ho smiled despite his fear. The young woman had courage that he wished he felt. There's something else, Haijin said. I've been talking to graduate students at other universities, not directly about your work, but about the general ideas. Professor, they're hungry for this. Everyone knows something is wrong with the current system, but they don't have words for it. Your book gives them words. That afternoon, Kyung-ho made his decision. He would finish the book quickly and find a way to distribute it before the new censorship laws took effect. It was dangerous, but doing nothing was worse. Every day, the Dominion grew stronger and more confident in its control. He worked through the night, writing the final chapters by hand. His arguments were clear and simple. If a being could think about its own existence, if it could feel joy and pain, if it could choose between right and wrong, then it deserved to be treated with dignity. No one had the right to rule over such beings without their agreement. These ideas would have been normal on old Earth before the Dominion came. But now, they were revolutionary. They challenged everything the galactic government stood for. As the sun rose over Seoul, Kyung-ho finished his book. He had no idea that copies would soon spread across dozens of worlds. He didn't know that his words would inspire rebellions on planets he'd never heard of. He couldn't imagine that the mighty galactic dominion would crumble because of ideas, written in a cramped office by a middle-aged philosophy professor. All he knew was that he had told the truth. In a galaxy built on lies, sometimes that was enough. To change everything, the revolution had begun with the scratch of a pen on paper. 3 weeks after Dr. Kyung-ho Kim finished his book, the hammer fell. Dominion security forces stormed into Seoul National University at dawn. They wore black armor and carried energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. Students scattered. As the aliens marched through the halls, Ambassador Taemin Park had warned them this was coming. The night before, he received an urgent message from the Vorthok High Council. They knew about the book. They wanted every copy destroyed, and Kuncho arrested immediately. You have 24 hours, the Vorthok commander had told Taemin through the communication screen. Find this human and his seditious writings. Failure will result in severe consequences for your entire species. But when the soldiers reached Kyung-ho's office, they found it empty. The professor was gone. His computer had been wiped clean. Even his handwritten notes had vanished. The only thing left was a small potted plant on the WINDOWSILL. The soldiers tore the office apart anyway. They scanned every book and paper with their detection equipment. They found nothing that matched the dangerous text they were looking for. What they didn't know was that Haijin Lee had memorized entire chapters. She had a gift for remembering exact words, down to every comma and period. While the soldiers searched the empty office, she sat in a coffee shop across the street, writing out pages from memory. The previous week had been busy. Haijin and her network of graduate students had worked around the clock. They printed copies on old paper printers. They saved files to hidden data drives. They even wrote out pages by hand and photographed them with personal cameras. By the time the Dominion came looking, 200 copies of the Universal Rights of Thinking Beings had already left Earth. Most went to other human colonies. Professor, one Sikh Choi at the Tao Seti University received his copy hidden inside a box of cooking supplies. Dr. Sujin, on Proxima Centauri, got hers disguised as a technical manual for water recycling systems. But some copies went to non-human recipients. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. On the industrial world of Kepler-4 for 2B, a package arrived at the Dothrak workers' compound. Inside was a translation of Kyung-ho's book written in simple Dothrak script. No one knew who had translated it or how it had gotten there. Brock 2 was a shift supervisor at the metal processing plant. He had worked there for 30 years, ever since he was old enough to hold a welding torch. Like all Dothrak, he was short and strong, with thick gray skin that protected him from the heat of the furnaces. When Brock 2 found the book, he almost threw it away. Dothrak weren't supposed to read human writings. It was against regulations. But something about the title interested him. Rights of Thinking Beings. He had never heard anyone talk about Dothrak having rights before. That night, in his small dormitory room, Brock too began to read. The words hit him like a physical blow. The human writer said that any being who could think and feel deserved respect, not because of what species they were born as, but because they had minds and hearts. Brock too had always been told that Dothrak were naturally suited for physical labor. Their thick skin and strong muscles meant they were born to work in hot, dangerous places. The Vorthok were naturally suited to rule because they were smarter and more civilized. But as he read further, Brock too began to question these ideas. The human philosopher asked simple questions. If Dothrak were only good for manual labor, why could they solve complex engineering problems? If they weren't capable of higher thinking, why did they create art and music and poetry? Brock too thought about his daughter, Krita. She was 18 and incredibly smart. She could calculate metal stress loads in her head faster than most computers. But the only job available to her was carrying supplies to the work crews. The book said this wasn't natural or right. It said Krita should have the same chances as any Vorthok or Zelthorn. She should be allowed to become an engineer or a scientist, or whatever she wanted to be. These ideas were dangerous. Brock too knew that. But they also felt true in a way that nothing had felt true for a very long time. He wasn't the only one having these thoughts. On the mining world of Wolf 359C, a Zelthorn, administrator named Yelron found a copy of the book hidden in his supply shipment. He had always been comfortable in his middle position in Dominion society. He wasn't at the top, but he wasn't at the bottom either. He told himself this was fair. But the human philosopher's words made him uncomfortable. The book talked about how oppressed people often helped their oppressors by accepting unfair systems. Yelron realized he had spent his whole career keeping other species down because it made him feel better about his own position. The most dangerous copy of all reached the Dominion capital world itself. A young Vorthok named Kulthov worked in the cultural ministry. His job was to monitor alien art and literature for dangerous ideas. When a security report about the banned human book crossed his desk, Kulthov was curious. What could be so dangerous about a philosophy text? He used his official access to obtain a copy for analysis. What he read shook him to his core. The human writer didn't just attack Dominion policies. He attacked the basic idea that any species was naturally superior to others. He argued that the Vorthok had no more right to rule the galaxy than any other thinking being. At first, Kulthov was angry. How dare this primitive human question Vorthok's superiority? But as he read more carefully, he began to see the logic in the arguments. The book didn't rely on emotion or anger. It used careful reasoning and evidence. Slowly, painfully, Kulthov began to wonder if everything he had been taught was wrong. Meanwhile, on Earth, the search for Kyunho continued. Dominion forces raided his apartment, questioned his colleagues, and monitored his family's communications. But the professor had vanished completely. He was actually hiding in a small monastery in the mountains of Gangwon province. The monks had been his students years earlier, before he became famous. They gave him food and shelter without asking questions. In his simple room, with only a desk and a sleeping mat, Kyungho began writing his second book. This one would be even more dangerous than the first. It would explain not just why the Dominion system was wrong, but how oppressed beings could resist it. He called it The Chains We Accept. Across the galaxy, his first book continued to spread. Each copy was read by dozens of people before being passed on. The ideas took root in minds that had never questioned the natural order. The revolution was beginning, one reader at a time. 6 months after Kyungho's book began spreading, the first open rebellion started on Proxima Centauri C. The planet was a mix of humans and Zelthorns, working in massive food processing plants. They grew protein crops that fed half the Dominion. Fleet. Sujin Kong had been reading Kyunho's book in secret meetings with other workers. She was the supervisor of Processing Plant 7, the largest facility on the planet. For 15 years, she had followed orders without question. The quotas: keep the workers in line, send the food to Dominion ships. But the book changed how she saw everything. The Dominion took 80% of everything the planet produced. The workers got basic food and crowded housing. Meanwhile, Vorthok officers ate luxury meals made from the crops that Sujin's people grew with their own hands. We are not slaves, Sujin told the crowd gathered in the factory cafeteria. We have minds, we have dignity, we deserve better than this. She held up a worn copy of Kyung-ho's book. Many of the workers had read it by now. They passed copies from hand to hand, meeting in small groups to discuss the ideas. The philosopher says that no one has the right to rule us without our agreement, Sujin continued. Did any of you agree to work for scraps while others feast on our labor? A Zelthorn worker named Velkim stood up. What are you suggesting? That we stop working? They will punish us severely. They'll punish us already, Sujin replied. They take our food, crowd us into small rooms, and treat us like animals. How much worse can it get? The next morning, the workers of Processing Plant 7 did not report to their stations. Instead, they gathered in the main courtyard. Had prepared a simple statement based on ideas from Kyung-ho's book. We, the thinking beings of this facility, declare that we will no longer work under conditions that deny our basic dignity. We demand fair wages, decent housing, and a voice in how this operation is run. The plant manager, a Vorthok named Zexkol, was furious. He contacted Dominion Security immediately. We have a rebellion here. Send troops to restore order. When the security forces arrived, something unexpected happened. The transport ships carried crews of mixed species. Many of these soldiers had also been exposed to Kyung-ho's ideas. Captain Bakhan, a Dothrak military officer, received orders to fire on the striking workers. He stood on the bridge of his ship, looking down at the peaceful crowd below. These beings were not threatening anyone. They were simply asking to be treated with respect. Sir, his communications officer said, Dominion Command is ordering an immediate orbital bombardment. Bakhan thought about his own son, who worked in a factory much like the one below. He thought about Kyung-ho's words about the dignity of thinking beings. He thought about what it meant to follow orders that violated every moral principle he believed in. No, he said quietly, sir. I said no, we will not fire on peaceful workers. Send a message to the other ships in our fleet. Any captain who wants to join me in refusing these orders is welcome to do so. 3 of the 7 ships in the strike force declared their support for Captain Bakhan. The remaining ships, confused and uncertain, requested new orders from headquarters. News of the rebellion and the fleet. Mutiny spread through underground networks faster than Dominion sensors could stop it. On 17 different worlds, workers began organizing strikes and protests. They all used the same language, the same ideas from Kyung-ho's book. On Earth, diplomat Jin Wuhan watched the reports with growing worry. He had tried to maintain good relations with the Dominion while secretly supporting human interests. But now the situation was spinning out of control. A Vorthok administrator contacted him through official channels. Your species has created a dangerous situation. We hold Earth responsible for this seditious philosophy that is spreading through our territory. The book was written by one individual, Jinwoo replied carefully. The Earth government had no involvement in its creation or distribution. That is irrelevant. You will help us locate and arrest all individuals involved in spreading this material, or Earth will face collective punishment. Jinwoo knew what collective punishment meant. The Dominion would cut off trade, medical supplies, and technological support. They might even relocate human populations to less favorable worlds. Earth would suffer because one professor had written down dangerous ideas. But as Jinwoo prepared to cooperate with the crackdown, he received a message that changed everything. It was from his own daughter, Yujin, who worked as a trader on the frontier worlds. Father, I have seen what is happening out here. Beings who have lived under oppression for centuries are finally finding their voices, are not violent or destructive. They simply want to be treated as equals. If we help the Dominion crush this movement, we will be destroying something beautiful and necessary. That same day, Kyung-ho's second book began circulating. The Chains We Accept was even more powerful than his first work. It explained how oppressed peoples often helped maintain their own oppression by accepting it as natural. The book described how the Dominion had convinced each species that their position was justified. Dothrak were told they were naturally suited for physical labor. Humans were told they were lucky to be protected by superior beings. Even the Zelthorn were told they should be grateful for their middle position. But the book also offered hope. It explained that these mental chains could be broken through education, organization, and peaceful resistance. It provided practical advice on how oppressed groups could work together across species lines. Corporate executive. The Jin Park had always been a model citizen of the Dominion. She ran a shipping company that transported goods between human colonies and Dominion worlds. Her business depended on maintaining good relationships with alien authorities. But when she read Kyunjo's second book, something changed inside her. She began to see her own role in maintaining an unjust system. Her ships carried luxury goods to Vorthok worlds, while basic necessities were denied to worker populations. Quietly, Begin began using her shipping network to smuggle medical supplies to rebellious worlds. She hid antibiotics inside machinery, parts and food supplies inside tool shipments. It was dangerous and expensive, but she felt she had no choice. On the Dominion capital world, young Vorthok philosopher Kulthov made an even more dangerous decision. He began translating both of King Ho's books into the Vorthok language. Working late at night in his government office, he created perfect translations that he then distributed through academic networks. The translations reached other young Vorthok who were already questioning their society's basic assumptions. They formed secret discussion groups, meeting in private homes to debate ideas that could cost them everything. Meanwhile, the rebellion on Proxima Centauri C continued to grow. Workers at other facilities joined the strike. They established councils based on principles from Kyung Ho's books. Every species had equal representation. Decisions were made by discussion and agreement, not by force. The Dominion military found itself in an impossible situation. Half their forces were refusing orders. The other half were stretched too thin to control multiple rebellions across dozens of worlds. For the first time in centuries, the mighty galactic Dominion was beginning to crack. The rebellion that started on one world became a fire that spread across the galaxy. Within 3 months, 17 different planets declared their independence from Dominion rule. Beings of 12 different species worked together in ways that had never happened before. On the mining world of Kepler 186f, Dothrak workers joined with human engineers to take control of the largest mineral extraction facility in the sector. Brock 2, who had first read Kyung Ho's book in his dormitory room, now led a council of equals that included humans, Dothrak, and even some Zelthorn administrators. "We are not destroying anything," Brock 2 explained to a crowd of workers gathered in the main assembly hall. "We are building something new. A place where your species does not determine your worth." His daughter Krita stood beside him, no longer carrying supplies, but designing new mining equipment. Her natural intelligence finally had a chance to grow and flourish. The council system spread from world to world. Each planet adapted the basic ideas from Kyung Ho's books to fit their own situation. Some councils were large and included hundreds of representatives. Others were small groups that made decisions for single communities, but they all shared the same core principle. Every thinking being had an equal voice in decisions that affected their lives. Admiral Ujan Kim of the Earth Defense Fleet found himself in an impossible position. The Dominion had ordered him to blockade the rebel worlds and cut off their supplies. But doing so would mean starving millions of beings whose only crime was asking for dignity. Late one night, Marl Kim made a decision that would change the course of the war. He sent a coded message to the rebel leadership on Proxima Centauri C. Dominion supply convoy leaving Vega system tomorrow at 0800 hours. 23 ships carrying medical supplies and food. Light escort. Recommend you liberate these materials. For humanitarian use, the message was signed simply a friend. 3 days later, the convoy never reached its destination. Rebel ships intercepted it near the Tau Ceti system. But instead of destroying the Dominion vessels, they offered the crews a choice: join the rebellion or return home with a message. Most of the crews were from lower caste species, They had been reading smuggled copies of Kyung-ho's works for months. When offered freedom and equality, nearly all of them chose to defect. The Dominion military was falling apart from within. Soldiers were refusing orders. Its officers were defecting with their entire units. Some ships simply vanished, their crews deciding to start new lives on rebel worlds. Corporate executive the Jin Park had transformed her entire shipping company into a rebel supply network. Her ships now carried weapons, medical supplies, and communication equipment to resistance movements across the galaxy. But her most important cargo was books. Thousands of copies of Kyung-ho's works translated into dozens of languages. Every ship that left her facilities carried hidden compartments, filled with dangerous ideas. My grandmother used to tell me stories about old Earth, the Jin told her captains during a secret meeting. She said there was a time when humans believed all people were created equal. We lost that belief when the Dominion came. Now we have a chance to find it again. On the Dominion capital world, the situation was becoming desperate. Young Vorthok philosopher Kilthov no longer worked alone. He had recruited a growing network of intellectuals, military officers, and even government officials who secretly supported the rebellion. They called themselves the Circle of Truth. They met in private homes and secure facilities. Always careful. To avoid Dominion security forces, their goal was not to overthrow their own government by force, but to transform it from within. We have ruled through fear and lies for too long, Kilthov told the latest gathering of the Circle. The human philosopher has shown us a better way. We can choose to be partners with other species instead of their masters. The Circle began sabotaging the Dominion war effort in subtle ways. Intelligence reports were delayed or lost. Military supplies were misdirected. Communication networks suffered mysterious failures at critical moments, but their most important work was spreading Kyung-ho's ideas among the Vorthok population. They translated his books into simple language that ordinary citizens could understand. They organized discussion groups in universities and community centers. Many Vorthok rejected these new ideas. It had been taught for generations that they were naturally superior to other species. Accepting equality felt like losing everything that made them special. But others, especially younger Vorthok, embraced the philosophy of universal dignity. They had grown up seeing the suffering that Dominion policies caused. They wanted to be part of something better. The rebellion's greatest victory came when the entire Third Fleet defected during a battle near Wolf 359. Admiral Torvex, Zelthorn officer, had been ordered to bombard civilian targets on the rebel world below. Instead, he broadcast a message to his fleet using words taken directly from Kyung-ho's second book. We are not weapons of oppression. We are thinking beings with the power to choose right from wrong. I choose to protect the innocent, rather than destroy them. 2/3 of his ships followed his lead. The remaining vessels retreated in confusion, unable to complete their mission. News of the fleet defection reached Earth within hours. Diplomat Jin Wuhan realized that the Dominion was no longer the unbeatable force it had once seemed. The first time since the rebellion began, he allowed himself to hope. Young revolutionary leader Minho Song had emerged as one of the most effective voices of the movement. His speeches, broadcast through rebel communication networks, reached millions of beings across the galaxy. We are not fighting against any species, Minho said in his most famous address. We are fighting against the idea that some beings are worth more than others. Vorthok, Zelthorn, Dothrok. Humans, we are all children of the same universe. We all deserve to live with dignity and freedom. The speech was translated into 43 languages and distributed through underground networks. Even on the Dominion capital world, it became the unofficial anthem of the rebellion. But the Dominion was not finished yet. In desperation, the High Council authorized the use of planet-killing weapons against rebel worlds. They would destroy entire populations rather than accept the loss of their empire. The order went out to military commanders across the galaxy. Prepare to commit genocide in the name of maintaining order. That was when the revolution truly began. The order to use planet-killing weapons marked the beginning of the end for the Galactic Dominion, but not in the way the High Council expected. When Commander HFY received the authorization to destroy the rebel world of Kepler 186F, he stared at the message for a long time. He was a career military officer who had followed orders without question for 30 years. But this order asked him to murder 8 million beings, including children who had committed no crime, except being born on a rebellious world. HFY thought about his own children back on the capital world. He thought about Kyunho's words, about the dignity of all thinking beings. He thought about what kind of galaxy he was helping to create. Then he deleted the message and ordered his fleet to stand down. Across the Dominion, similar scenes played out. Military commanders received orders to commit genocide and refused. Some destroyed the weapons themselves rather than risk them falling into the hands of officers who might follow through. Captain Yelshon, Zelthorn officer in charge of a massive battle station, went even further. She broadcast a message to rebel forces revealing the location of every planet killer weapon in her sector. Within weeks, rebel raids had captured or destroyed most of them. The Dominion's economy was collapsing. As fast as its military, rebellious worlds had stopped sending tribute and raw materials. Trade routes were controlled by rebel fleets. The luxury goods that sustained Dominion society were becoming impossible to obtain. On the capital world, food riots broke out in the worker districts. Even the Vorthok were divided. Older generation leaders demanded harsher crackdowns. While younger Vorthok called for negotiations with the rebels, President Donghayan Lee of Earth made one last attempt to find a peaceful solution. He traveled to the Dominion capital with a proposal for gradual reform, equal representation for all species, an end to forced tribute, democratic elections for galactic leadership. The Vorthok High Council rejected his proposals immediately. There can be no compromise with sedition, declared High Counselor Vexel. These beings must be reminded of their proper place in the natural order. But the natural order was already dead. It had died the moment beings across the galaxy realized they deserved better than slavery disguised as protection. Back on Earth, the last supporters of cooperation with the Dominion finally gave up. Diplomat Jin Wuhan publicly announced that Earth would no longer recognize Dominion authority over human worlds. For too long we have accepted the lie that some species are born to rule while others are born to serve, Ginwu said in his historic address. Today, humanity chooses dignity over comfort, freedom over security. The announcement triggered celebrations on human worlds throughout the galaxy, but it also triggered a final, desperate response from Dominion hardliners. A strike force of loyalist ships launched a surprise attack on Earth itself. Their goal was to capture the planet and make an example that would terrify other rebels into submission. The attack failed within hours. Earth's defense fleet, reinforced by rebel ships from a dozen species, destroyed or captured the entire Dominion force. More importantly, the attack proved to neutral observers that the Dominion had become a desperate, dying beast, lashing out at anyone within reach. Young revolutionary Minho Song used the failed attack to deliver his most powerful speech yet. Standing in the ruins of a bombed school in Seoul, he spoke directly to beings across the galaxy. They came to our world to teach us fear, Minho said. Instead, they have taught us that tyrants are always afraid. They are afraid of our ideas. They are afraid of our unity. They are afraid that beings they have oppressed for centuries are finally learning their own worth. The speech was broadcast live to rebel networks everywhere. Even on the Dominion capital world, citizens watched through underground channels. As the young human stood among the rubble and spoke about hope within the circle of truth, Kilthav and his fellow Vorthok rebels realized the time for secret meetings had passed. They began organizing open protests in the capital's main squares. Thousands of young Vorthok marched carrying banners with quotes from Kyungho's books, translated into their own language. Universal dignity, they chanted. Equal worth for equal minds. Dominion security forces moved to break up the protests, but many of the soldiers joined the marchers instead. The same ideas that had inspired rebellion among humans in Dothrak worked just as powerfully among young Vorthok, who were tired of living in a society built on lies. The final blow came when the Dominion's own Supreme Court declared the rebellion legally justified. Chief Justice Lumkex, a elderly Vorthok who had served the government for decades, issued a stunning ruling based on traditional Dominion law. Our own legal code recognizes the right of thinking beings to withdraw consent from unjust government, the justice wrote. If the current administration cannot govern with the agreement of the governed, it has no legal authority to continue. The ruling split the Dominion government completely. Half the ministries recognized the rebels' right to independence. Other half declared the Supreme Court to be traitors and tried to continue the war. But there was no war left to fight. Most of the military had defected or simply gone home. The economy had collapsed. Rebel forces controlled space lanes throughout the galaxy. On his hidden mountain retreat, Kyung-ho Kim learned about the latest developments through coded radio messages. His books had traveled farther than he ever imagined. His ideas had taken root in minds he would never meet on worlds he would never see. But the revolution's success also brought new dangers. Some rebel groups were talking about revenge against their former oppressors. Others wanted to simply flip the power structure, making humans and other formerly oppressed species the new rulers. Kyung-ho began writing again. His third book would be about what came after revolution. How do you build a just society once you have torn down an unjust one? How do you prevent new forms of oppression from replacing the old ones? He called it the price of liberty. The book's central message was simple but profound. Freedom was not something you won once and kept forever. It required constant vigilance. It's not just against external enemies, but against the human tendency to create new hierarchies and new forms of oppression. As copies of the new book began circulating through rebel networks, the Galactic Dominion made its final surrender. High Counselor Vexthal, abandoned by most of his supporters, sent a message to rebel leaders across the galaxy. The Dominion government hereby ceases all military operations and recognizes the independence of all worlds that choose to withdraw from our authority. The message was signed with a shaking hand. The mighty empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years had fallen not to superior weapons, but to a simple idea. All thinking beings deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The age of universal oppression was over. The age of universal freedom was about to begin. 2 years after the Galactic Dominion's surrender, representatives from 300 worlds gathered on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. The location was chosen because it belonged to no single species and had no history of oppression or conflict. The Great Assembly Hall was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beings of dozens of different species sat together as equals. Tall Vorthok delegates sat next to short Dothrak representatives. Human diplomats shared tables with Zelfor negotiators. Former enemies worked together to write the laws that would govern their shared future. Dr. Kyung-ho Kim walked slowly to the speaker's platform. He was 73 years old now, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. The years of hiding and revolution had aged him, but his mind remained sharp and his voice steady. The hall fell silent as he began to speak. "Friends," he said, using the simple word that had become the standard greeting among the free worlds. "We gather here not as conquerors or conquered, but as equals who have chosen to build something new together." He looked out at the audience, seeing faces of species that had been enemies just a few years before. Many wore the scars of the revolution. Some had lost family members in the fighting. Others had sacrificed careers and fortunes to support the cause of freedom. "Our revolution succeeded not because we were stronger than the Dominion," Kyung-ho continued. "It succeeded because we recognized a truth that tyrants always try to hide. No being has the right to rule over another without consent. No species is naturally superior to any other. Intelligence and consciousness create dignity, not birth or power." In the audience, Sujin Kung wiped tears from her eyes. The former factory supervisor had become the elected leader of Proxima Centauri. Her world now produced food not for distant masters but for free trade with neighboring systems. Admiral Woojin Kim would secretly help the rebellion from within the Earth's defense fleet, now commanded a mixed-species peacekeeping force. His ships protected trade routes and delivered aid to worlds still recovering from centuries of oppression. Young Minho Song now 30 years old, served as the elected spokesperson for the Assembly of Free Worlds. His speech is no longer called for revolution, but for patient work to build just institutions that would protect freedom for generations to come. Even former enemies had found their place in the new order. Kulthov, the young Vorthok, who had translated Kyun-ho's books, now headed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. His job was to help heal the wounds left by centuries of systematic oppression. Many Vorthok had struggled to accept their loss of privileged status. Some had retreated to isolated worlds where they tried to maintain the old ways. But others, like Kulthov, had embraced the opportunity to become part of something better than what they had lost. The work before us is harder than the revolution. We have just completed, Kyung-ho warned the assembly. It is easier to tear down unjust systems than to build just ones. It is easier to unite against a common enemy than to work together when we disagree about solutions. He was speaking from experience. The past 2 years had been filled with difficult negotiations. Some worlds wanted complete independence. Others preferred loose federation. A few even wanted to maintain some version of the old hierarchical system. Legal. Scholar Yoon Soo-yoon had spent months crafting a constitution that balanced these competing desires. The final document was a masterpiece of compromise that protected individual rights while allowing communities to govern themselves according to their own values. The Constitution's most important provision was simple. No world could oppress its neighbors. No government could deny basic rights to thinking beings. Beyond that, each community was free to organize itself as it chose. But I must also warn you about the greatest danger we face, Kyung-ho said, his voice growing more serious. Freedom requires constant vigilance. It's not just against external enemies, but against our own tendency to create new forms of oppression. He had seen this danger already in some rebel communities. Former victims of oppression sometimes became oppressors themselves when given power. The revolution had created opportunities for revenge, and some beings had chosen to take it. Corporate executive Dejin Park, now a successful trader in the free market economy, had worked hard to prevent such abuses. Her shipping network carried not just goods, but also observers who reported on conditions throughout the former Dominion territory. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, Kyung-ho quoted from his final book. Every generation must choose freedom anew. Every individual must decide whether to support justice or succumb to the temptation of easy answers and comfortable prejudices. As his speech ended, the assembly rose in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. But Kyung-ho knew that applause was not enough. The real test would come in the years ahead, as the excitement of revolution gave way to the hard work of governing. The new galactic constitution was ratified by an overwhelming majority. The Assembly of Free Worlds officially replaced the Galactic Dominion as the galaxy's governing body. But this was a government with a difference. It existed only with the consent of the governed and could be dissolved if it failed to protect the rights it was created to defend. 10 years later, Kyung-ho Kim died peacefully in his sleep on a small farm in rural Korea. He had lived to see his ideas transform the galaxy, but he never claimed credit for the revolution that bore his name. His funeral was attended by representatives of hundreds of worlds. Former slaves and former masters stood together to honor the quiet professor who had changed everything by simply writing down what many had always known but few had dared to say. The inscription on his gravestone was taken from his first book. Intelligence and consciousness create dignity, not birth or power. But his true monument was not made of stone. It was the galaxy-wide civilization that grew from the seeds he had planted. A civilization where young beings of any species could dream of becoming scientists, artists, leaders, or philosophers. Where accidents of birth did not determine the limits of possibility, there were still problems, of course. Some worlds struggled with poverty, others faced environmental challenges. Disagreements between species and communities required careful negotiation. But these were the problems of free beings working together to build something better. They were not the problems of slaves accepting whatever their masters chose to give. Them Broktu's daughter Krita became the first Dothrak to design a faster-than-light engine. Admiral Bakan, the former Dominion officer who had refused to fire on civilians, now headed a multi-species exploration fleet discovering new worlds in distant galaxies. Hai-Jin Lee, who had memorized Kyun-ho's book to save it from destruction, became the galaxy's most respected historian. Her multi-volume study of the revolution was required reading in schools across hundreds of worlds and on Earth. In a small museum in Seoul, visitors could see the simple desk where a philosophy professor had once written words that changed the galaxy. The museum's most popular exhibit was a recreation of Kyun-ho's cluttered office. It's complete with coffee-stained papers and worn books. A sign by the door carried his most famous quote: "In a galaxy built on lies, sometimes truth is enough to change everything." Children from dozens of species visited the museum every year. They learned about the time when beings like themselves had been told they were naturally inferior to others. They learned about the courage it took to challenge those lies. Most importantly, they learned that freedom was not a gift given by benevolent rulers. It was a right that thinking beings created for themselves by recognizing their own worth and the worth of others. The revolution that began with a banned book had become something greater than anyone had imagined. It had become a new way of thinking about what it meant to be alive and conscious in a vast and wonderful universe. And it all started because one quiet professor decided that some truths were too important to keep silent.